Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandom at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me tell you all about it. First of all, it's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast, all in one place. So download the free Anchor app now or go to anchor.fm to get started. Thanks for listening to the Pigskin Tales podcast. This story was written and produced by your host, Ross Bliley, edited by Nikki Bliley. You can follow me on social media outlets such as Facebook and Twitter, music streaming providers Spotify, Podchaser, Apple Podcasts, Castbox.fm, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Breaker, and Pocket Casts. If you like what you hear and want to support my work, then Anchor.fm and Patreon.com is where you can find me. Just search under Ross's Fancast. On the World Wide Web at rossbliley.com is where all my episodes are uploaded. The soundtrack is provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io. Thanks for your support, and I always appreciate feedback. Last time on the Pigskin Tales podcast, we learned that Mr. Nevers played professional football for the Jacksonville Pros, Duluth Eskimos, and the Chicago Cardinals. We also learned that he still holds the record for most points scored in an NFL game, and that his record for most rushing touchdowns scored in a game has been tied twice in NFL history. In this modern day of professional football, will that record ever be broken? This time on the Pigskin Tales podcast, we learn more about the big dog's life after football. So sit back, kick your feet up, grab a drink, and enjoy the Pigskin Tales podcast. Part 8. Coaching. In the coming months after announcing that he was retiring from professional football, Ernie had gotten calls to be an assistant coach at some Big Ten universities. However, he was headstrong on coaching for Pop Warner at Stanford. On March 6, 1932, it was reported in the Santa Ana Register that Ernie Nevers, former All-American fullback, is slated to join the coaching staff at his alma mater, Stanford, starting on September 15th. He will be co-coaching with Murray Cuddlebeck, the Stanford Grays, also known as the Goof Squad. Warner told the press that
it's a very important position.
After the season, Pop resigned as head coach of the Stanford Indians to take the head coaching job at Temple University. I can surmise then that Nevers was initially offered the position of head coach, but refused because he only wanted to be an assistant. The head coaching job was then offered to and accepted by offensive line coach Claude E. Thornhill. In Thornhill's first season as the Indians' head coach, the team had won 8 games, lost once, and tied once. In addition to earning a trip to play in the National Championship Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California, the team had also won the Pacific Coast Championship title. On New Year's Day in 1934, the heavily favored Indians fell 7-0 to the Columbia Lions. This was a huge upset victory for the Lions because Stanford had only been scored on 4 times all season and only lost to Princeton. For 3 days leading up to the big game, the weather in Southern California was uncharacteristically wet. The Pasadena Fire Department had to pump the field dry from all the rain that turned it into a lake. The muddy field did both teams no favors in making it easy. In the first quarter, the field was so slick that no team could get a good handle on the ball, let alone score a touchdown. However, in the middle of the second quarter, the Lions' offense ran a trick play that made the Indians' defensive line key on 2 backfield players. In turn, the quarterback for the Lions, Cliff Montgomery, spun his way around the weak side edge and ran it in for a 17-yard touchdown. The extra point was good, making the game 7-0. The Indians and the Cowboys roared back as best they could, but they just couldn't get their footing on solid ground. In the end, it was 7-0 Lions. The win for the Lions was deemed the greatest victory over Stanford in Columbia University history. It was also deemed one of the biggest upsets in Rose Bowl history at the time. Next season, the Indians came back just as strong. This time, their record was 9-0-1, heading into the 1935 Rose Bowl. Their opponent was the undefeated Alabama Crimson Tide. The weather was a bit fairer in this one. However, the Tide took it to the Indians and steamrolled to a 29-13 victory over the Cowboys. In 1936, Nevers helped the Indians to a 3rd consecutive Pacific Coast Conference title, as well as a 3rd consecutive trip to the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. A 3rd time's the charm in winning the national title, right? The Indians and the SMU Mustangs clashed on January 1, 1936. Stanford was 7-1 and Southern Methodist was undefeated. According to RoseBowlHistory.com, the game was a sellout of 84,784 fans. In the first quarter, it was Indians running back Bill Pullman who scored on a 1-yard rushing touchdown. SMU could not counter with a touchdown of their own. It was all defense from there. Finally, Thornhill's Cowboys came through and won a Rose Bowl for their coach. After this season, Nevers resigned as assistant coach of the Indians and took the head coaching job at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. It was reported by the Associated Press and published in the Oakland Tribune on January 17, 1936, that Nevers succeeds Herb McCracken as the head coach after McCracken resigned after 12 seasons. The locals were so excited to learn that an All-American and pro football legend was coming to their town that they decided to throw a parade in his honor. The town was completely shut down for a day. Once the happiness and excitement cooled down and the football team got down to business, it ended in a disappointment of a season. Lafayette College went 1-8 with Nevers as their head coach. After the season, Nevers resigned after accepting a role at the University of Iowa as the running backs and tight ends coach in March of 1937. Nevers held the role for 2 seasons, helping the Hawkeyes compile a miserable 1-7 record as well as a 1-8 record. After 2 more losing seasons as a college coach in the late 30s, Nevers decided to try his hand at coaching in the pros for a 3rd time. The owner of the Chicago Cardinals, Charlie Bidwell, signed Mr. Nevers to a 1-year contract to succeed former Cardinals teammate Millen Creighton. The Cardinals were 2-8 under Creighton in 1938, and with Bidwell signing Nevers, he's hoping the fans will not only love the hiring, but fall back in love with the team. When asked why he chose to hire Nevers as the head coach, Bidwell said,
I consider myself extremely fortunate in being able to obtain Nevers. He unquestionably is one of the best known figures in football. As a player, he ranks with Eckersall, Grange, Thorpe, and Nagurski. As a coach, He has had extensive experience in both professional and college football and established himself firmly in the affection of Cardinal followers when he starred for and coached the team. Other National League coaches always had the utmost respect for him. I pledge him the full cooperation of the Cardinal staff in his attempt to bring the team to the front in the National League where it belongs.
At the end of the 1939 NFL season, the Cardinals were dead last in every category. The team's win-loss record was a pitiful 1-10. Nevers could not revive a struggling team. In February 1940, it was reported in the Los Angeles Times that Nevers had mailed his resignation letter to Charlie Bidwell, noting that he wished to reside permanently in San Francisco. His coaching career was over. He intended to return to Stanford to obtain a degree in physical education. Part 9. The Military. In September of 1940, Nevers enrolled as a non-traditional college student at his alma mater. Over the course of the next year, he completed his degree in physical education. If you're wondering, he did not become a physical education teacher. The next phase of his life was that he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps at the age of 39.
1, 2, 3, 4, United States Marine Corps.
1, 2, 3, 4, United States Marine Corps.
1, 2, 3, 4, I love the Marine Corps.
1, 2, 3, 4, I love the Marine Corps.
Boot camp was 5 weeks long, beginning in August of 1942, held in San Diego, California. Once complete, it was reported in the Santa Ana Register that he was given the rank of captain, serving with the Aviation Ground Forces. About 6 months later, it was reported that Nevers was stationed in Lansing, Michigan at the Olds Gunnery School for a few weeks. He was then transferred back to California to be stationed at the Santa Barbara Marine Air Base. While stationed at the air base in Santa Barbara, an unfortunate ailment overtook Ernie's wife, May. She was rushed to the hospital in San Francisco. She was diagnosed with pneumonia. As soon as Ernie was notified of the situation, he too rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately he didn't make it in time. She passed away peacefully. She was so young and full of life. At age 33, she had a lot of life left, but it was just an unfortunate time that God called her home. Ernie mourned the death of May as long as he could until it was time to go back to serving his country. It was reported by Russ Newland of the Reno Gazette-Journal on October 23rd of 1943 that Nevers was finally notified of his first World War II assignment overseas in the Pacific Theater. Nelson Cullenward, a former sports writer, sent a letter to Russ Newland noting, "We said goodbye and the big guy looked like a graphite commando with pistol and shoulder holster, a long knife in his belt, and a tin helmet." In my opinion, that's a scary dude to envision. While Nevers was stationed in the South Pacific Theater during World War II, he was asked by one of his crew if he had thought of any plans after the mission was over. He happened to mention that he would love to go back to San Francisco and start an NFL franchise. On April 9, 1944, in the Herald and Review newspaper, it was reported by the Chicago Associated Press that Nevers was announcing his post-war program of seeking an NFL franchise for San Francisco. He made his plans known in a letter to Superior Court Judge Michael L. McKinley of Chicago.
Dear Mr. McKinley, this is Ernie Nevers. Some people know me as the Big Dog. Some people know me as Coach. Some people know me as the Big Blonde. Most people know me because I scored 6 rushing touchdowns in an NFL game. But what I'd like to do once I get out of this gritty, bloody war over here is I want to sit down with Mr. Layden and I want to talk about starting up an NFL franchise in San Francisco. Yours truly, Ernie Big Dog Nevers.
He said he wanted to have an open negotiation with President Elmer Layden, a former college football opponent, once he returned to San Francisco from the Pacific Theater. About 5 months later, it was reported by Russ Newland that our famous Captain Ernie Nevers had returned home from the South Pacific battles after 10 months. When asked, Nevers said that he couldn't officially talk about his mission, but he offered that he was in charge of a group of ground personnel of a specific squadron. Also, when he was pressed about athletics the servicemen enjoyed while on base, he said that
softball was the most popular and that it was a tie between basketball and volleyball.
Mr. Newland also asked about football and snakes. Yes, snakes. Nevers told him that
they played some touch football between the tents and were beginning to put on some boxing shows when I left.
He also noted,
I never saw any big snakes. The only ones I saw were pink coral snakes. They're little, but they pack an awful wallop. I heard there were big snakes in the jungle, but I never went looking for any.
By the time Nevers had returned back to San Fran in October and had an interview with Newland, it was reported on December 22, 1944 in the Fresno Bee that Captain Nevers was promoted to Major and would be stationed at Treasure Island. No, it wasn't the resort and casino if you're chuckling about that. While stationed at Treasure Island, he became the Assistant Athletics Officer of the Marine Corps in charge of activities. In February of 1945, it was reported by the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat that Major Nevers was relocated to the Marine Corps base in San Diego. He was then promoted to be the next athletic officer of the Marine Corps, taking over for Major Charles Church. A month later, journalists with the Chicago Daily Tribune were in attendance in Los Angeles for a meeting with Major Ernie Nevers, Lieutenant Colonel Dick Hanley, and President John L. Keeshan. Someone snapped a photo of Nevers putting pen to paper for the front page of the sports section. Nevers is shown signing a 3-year contract as Dick Hanley's assistant for the new All-America Conference football club in Chicago named the Rockets. Duties for the new job would begin as soon as he was discharged from the Marine Corps. At the end of May 1945, journalists from the Petaluma Agnes Courier found out and reported that Major Ernie Nevers was subject to leave the Marine Corps soon, and that Major George Esau was taking over as athletic officer for Nevers. Since the Rockets had not yet started, Nevers was going to be working for Keeshan's trucking company, known as the Transcontinental Freight Lines. Thanks for listening to the Pigskin Tales podcast. This story will continue in the next episode. This story was also written and produced by your host, Ross Bliley, edited by Nikki Bliley. You can follow me on social media outlets such as Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to the show today through Spotify, Podchaser, Apple Podcasts, Castbox.fm, Pocket Casts, Breaker, and Radio Public. If you like what you hear and want to support my work, go to Anchor.fm. On the World Wide Web at rossbliley.com is where all my episodes are uploaded. The soundtrack is provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io. Thanks for your support, and I always appreciate feedback. Sources of information were found on the web at newspapers.com, articles retrieved from wikipedia.com, 1900 to 1909 prices and wages by decade from the Library Guide at the University of Missouri, YouTube, ProFootballHallOfFame.com, History.com, the Encyclopedia Britannica, the National Football Foundation, and ProFootballResearchers.org. We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.